Imagine squatting over a wooden plank, your bare flesh exposed to the freezing air, while dozens of strangers defecate beside you in complete silence. Below your feet, a river of human waste flows directly into the water supply that feeds your neighbor's wells. This was not a nightmare. This was Tuesday morning in medieval Europe, where the simple act of relieving yourself could lead to explosive death, social humiliation, or a fatal plunge into a pit of fermenting excrement. The medieval world was a place where privacy was a luxury reserved to wealthy, and basic sanitation was a concept that wouldn't emerge for centuries. What we consider the most private human function was performed in full view of strangers, often with consequences that would haunt communities for generations. The stories hidden within these crude facilities reveal a civilization teetering on the edge of biological catastrophe, where survival often depended on navigating the treacherous social and physical landscape of communal waste disposal. Behind the stone walls of medieval cities, a network of primitive toilets created a web of disease, death, and social control that shaped every aspect of daily life. These weren't just places of necessity. They were death traps, social battlegrounds, and windows into the darkest corners of human behavior. Medieval public toilets, known as necessaries or garderobes, were designed as long wooden benches with multiple circular holes cut into the surface. Users would sit side by side, their waste dropping through these openings into pits, rivers, or castle moats below. Privacy partitions were virtually non-existent, and the concept of personal space during defecation was alien to medieval society. Men, women, and children of all social classes would perform their bodily functions in full view of one another, creating an atmosphere of forced intimacy that modern minds can barely comprehend. The social dynamics within these facilities were brutal and hierarchical. Wealthy merchants and nobles would claim the cleanest spots, often those positioned over flowing water, while peasants and laborers were relegated to areas where waste accumulated in stagnant pools. Fights would break out over preferred positions, and the unwritten rules governing toilet etiquette could determine a person's social standing within their community. Those who violated these invisible boundaries faced public humiliation, physical violence, or complete social ostracism. But the psychological horror of shared elimination was nothing compared to the physical dangers that lurked beneath those wooden planks. Medieval toilet construction was a masterclass in engineering negligence. The most common design involved positioning toilets over castle moats, rivers, or purpose-built pits called gong pits. These structures created a perfect storm of structural instability and toxic gas accumulation. The wooden planks, constantly exposed to moisture and corrosive waste, would rot and collapse without warning, sending users plummeting into the sewage below. Historical records document numerous cases of accidental deaths from toilet collapses. In 1183, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa nearly died when a floor gave way beneath him during a feast at Erfurt, plunging him into a cesspit. While Barbarossa survived, several nobles perished in the incident, their bodies recovered days later from the putrid waste. These collapses weren't isolated incidents. They were regular occurrences that claimed lives across medieval Europe. The pits themselves were engineered death traps. Most were dug between 10 and 20 feet deep, with smooth stone walls that made escape impossible. The accumulated waste created a toxic environment where methane gas could reach lethal concentrations. Workers tasked with cleaning these pits, known as gong farmers, wore crude respiratory protection and worked only at night when cooler temperatures reduced the risk of gas explosions. Many never emerged alive from their descents into these man-made hells. The positioning of these toilets created an even more insidious danger that would poison entire communities. Medieval urban planners displayed a shocking ignorance of basic sanitation principles by positioning toilets directly over water sources. Castle garderobes were routinely built to discharge waste into moats, which often connected to rivers that supplied drinking water to downstream communities. This practice created a continuous cycle of contamination that spread disease across vast geographical areas. The Thames in London became a flowing sewer as hundreds of public toilets discharged directly into its waters. Historical accounts describe the river's surface covered with a thick layer of human waste, creating a brown foam that could be seen from miles away. The stench was so overwhelming that Parliament was forced to relocate sessions during summer months when the smell became unbearable. Citizens who drew water from the Thames for drinking, cooking, and washing were unknowingly consuming a concentrated mixture of human waste from thousands of upstream sources. Rural communities faced similar contamination issues. Village toilets were often positioned over streams that fed into wells and springs used by neighboring settlements. A single outbreak of dysentery or cholera in one village could spread rapidly through the water system, wiping out entire populations downstream. The medieval understanding of disease transmission was so primitive that communities continued these practices even after witnessing the devastating consequences. The contamination wasn't limited to water sources. It seeped into every aspect of medieval food production and consumption. Medieval agricultural practices created a direct pipeline from human waste to dinner tables across Europe. Farmers routinely collected sewage from public toilets and gong pits to use as fertilizer for crops, believing that human waste was particularly effective for growing vegetables and grains. This practice, known as night soil application, meant that medieval families were literally eating food grown in their own excrement. The collection and transport of this waste created additional opportunities for contamination. Gong farmers would load their carts with fresh sewage and travel through city streets, often spilling their cargo onto roads where food vendors conducted business. The waste would mix with mud, creating a toxic sludge that coated the wheels of food carts and the feet of customers. Bread, vegetables, and meat products sold in these markets carried traces of human waste that had been ground into the very foundation of commercial areas. Market regulations of the time revealed the extent of this contamination. City officials repeatedly issued ordinances forbidding the dumping of human waste in areas where food was sold, indicating that the practice was widespread and ongoing. Penalties for violations were severe, including public flogging and banishment, yet historical records show that enforcement was sporadic and often ineffective. The relationship between waste and food became even more disturbing when considering the feeding practices for livestock destined for human consumption. One of the most revolting aspects of medieval waste management was the deliberate feeding of human excrement to pigs destined for slaughter. This practice, documented across Europe and Asia, involved positioning pig pens directly beneath toilet facilities, allowing the animals to consume fresh human waste as it fell from above. The pig served as living garbage disposals, processing sewage while simultaneously growing fat for eventual human consumption. The arrangement created a closed loop of contamination that defied modern understanding of food safety. Families would defecate directly into pig pens, watch the animals consume their waste, and then slaughter and eat those same pigs weeks or months later. The practice was so common that specialized toilet pig facilities were constructed in urban areas with multiple tiers of toilets feeding a single pig population below. Historical accounts describe the aggressive behavior of these waste-fed pigs, which developed a taste for human flesh after consuming excrement. There are documented cases of these animals attacking and partially consuming children who fell into their pens. The pig's meat was described as having a distinctive flavor and texture that was actually preferred by some medieval consumers, who considered it a delicacy. The practice extended beyond pigs to other livestock, creating a comprehensive system of waste recycling that contaminated multiple food sources simultaneously. The most dangerous occupation in medieval society belonged to the gong farmers, professional waste removers who descended into toilet pits to manually extract accumulated sewage. These men worked exclusively at night, not out of shame, but because daylight hours increased the risk of methane gas ignition from torch flames. Their work required them to enter confined spaces filled with toxic gases, armed only with crude tools and primitive protective equipment. The physical process of gong farming was a horrifying ordeal. Workers would lower themselves into pits using rope ladders, their bodies protected only by leather aprons and cloth masks soaked in vinegar. The accumulated waste often reached depths of 15 to 20 feet, creating a semi-solid mass that had to be broken apart with shovels and picks. The workers would fill buckets with this material and hoist them to the surface, where associates would load the waste onto carts for transport to agricultural areas. The health consequences for gong farmers were severe and predictable. Most suffered from chronic respiratory problems caused by prolonged exposure to methane and hydrogen sulfide gases. Skin infections were universal, as the corrosive nature of human waste would eat through protective clothing. The average career of a gong farmer lasted less than 5 years, with most dying from lung diseases or succumbing to injuries sustained during pit collapses. Despite these dangers, gong farming was a lucrative profession. The high mortality rate created a constant demand for new workers, and experienced gong farmers could command wages equivalent to skilled craftsmen. Some even achieved a degree of social respect, as their services were essential for maintaining urban sanitation systems. The waste they removed revealed disturbing secrets about medieval diet and health that would shock modern observers. Archaeological excavations of medieval toilet pits have uncovered a treasure trove of information about daily life, diet, and parasitic infections that plagued medieval populations. The preserved waste provides an unfiltered window into the biological realities of medieval existence, revealing details that written records never captured. Analysis of preserved fecal matter shows that medieval diets were heavily contaminated with parasitic worms, bacteria, and toxic substances. Roundworms, tapeworms, and whipworms were present in virtually every sample, indicating that parasitic infections were universal among medieval populations. The concentration of these parasites was often so high that they would have caused severe malnutrition and digestive disorders in living hosts. The waste also contained evidence of desperate attempts to treat various ailments. Fragments of toxic plants like nightshade and mercury compounds appear regularly in medieval waste samples, showing that people were consuming poisonous substances as medicine. The presence of these materials in such high concentrations suggests that accidental poisoning from medical treatments was common. Perhaps most disturbing were the non-organic materials found in medieval waste. Fragments of pottery, metal objects, and textile fibers indicate that medieval people regularly consumed non-food items, either accidentally or intentionally. Some of these materials show evidence of deliberate ingestion, suggesting that eating clay, metal shavings, or cloth was practiced as a form of folk medicine. The concentration of these materials in toilet pits also reveals a shocking frequency of accidental deaths during defecation. Medieval toilet facilities were designed to reinforce social hierarchies through the deliberate creation of different quality waste disposal options. The wealthy enjoyed private garderobes with flowing water beneath, while the poor were forced to use communal facilities that emptied into stagnant pits. This system wasn't merely about comfort, it was a deliberate mechanism of social control that used human waste as a tool of oppression. Castle toilets were positioned to demonstrate the Lord's power over his subjects by literally depositing waste onto their living areas. Many castle garderobes were built to discharge directly onto the heads of people entering or leaving the fortress, creating a humiliating gauntlet that visitors had to navigate. This practice served both practical and symbolic purposes, as it discouraged unwanted visitors while demonstrating the Lord's complete disregard for his subjects' dignity. The quality of toilet facilities available to different social classes created stark health disparities that reinforced existing power structures. Wealthy merchants and nobles had access to toilets with running water, which reduced their exposure to disease-causing organisms. Peasants and laborers, forced to use communal facilities with poor drainage, suffered from higher rates of intestinal diseases and parasitic infections that further reduced their ability to improve their social standing. The social rituals surrounding toilet use were equally disturbing. Wealthy individuals would often bring servants to assist with cleaning and waste removal, creating a master-servant dynamic that extended into the most private bodily functions. These servants, known as grooms of the stool, held positions of surprising social importance, as their intimate access to nobles made them valuable sources of information and influence. The accumulation of human waste in medieval toilet pits created bomb-like conditions that could detonate without warning. Methane gas, produced by the decomposition of organic waste, would accumulate in enclosed spaces until it reached explosive concentrations. The introduction of any ignition source, torch flame, lightning strike, or even static electricity, could trigger devastating explosions that would destroy buildings and kill everyone in the vicinity. Historical records document several catastrophic toilet explosions that claimed multiple lives. In 1326, a London toilet facility exploded during a thunderstorm, killing 12 people and destroying 3 adjacent buildings. The blast was so powerful that body parts were found scattered across a radius of several hundred yards. Similar incidents occurred throughout Europe, with some explosions powerful enough to breach castle walls and collapse entire sections of fortifications. The unpredictable nature of these explosions created a constant atmosphere of terror around toilet use. People would approach these facilities with genuine fear, knowing that their next visit might be their last. The psychological impact of this fear affected medieval society's relationship with bodily functions, creating anxieties and superstitions that persisted for centuries. Attempts to prevent explosions led to even more dangerous practices. Some communities would deliberately ignite accumulated gases during controlled burns, a process that often went wrong and resulted in uncontrolled fires that consumed entire neighborhoods. Others would use long poles to stir waste pits, hoping to release gases gradually, but this practice often triggered the very explosions they were trying to prevent. The fear of explosion wasn't the only terror associated with medieval toilet use. The facilities themselves became hunting grounds for criminals and predators. Medieval toilet facilities became focal points for criminal activity due to their isolated locations and the vulnerable position of users. The communal nature of these spaces, combined with the private nature of the activities conducted within them, created perfect conditions for robbery, assault, and murder. Historical court records reveal a disturbing pattern of crimes committed in and around toilet facilities. The most common crimes were robberies targeting individuals who were literally caught with their pants down. Thieves would hide in waste pits or behind toilet structures, waiting for wealthy victims to assume vulnerable positions before striking. The victims' inability to flee quickly made them easy targets, and the isolated nature of many toilet facilities meant that screams for help often went unheard. Sexual assaults were tragically common in medieval toilet facilities. The combination of privacy, vulnerability, and the absence of effective law enforcement created environments where predators could operate with impunity. Women and children faced particular dangers, as they were often targeted by groups of men who would trap them in enclosed toilet spaces. The social stigma associated with reporting such crimes meant that many incidents went unreported and unpunished. Murder was also a regular occurrence in medieval toilets. The disposal of bodies was simplified by the presence of deep waste pits, and the overwhelming smell of sewage helped mask the odor of decomposition. Investigators would often discover skeletal remains years later during routine pit cleaning, but by then the crimes were impossible to solve. The criminal activity extended beyond individual predators to organized groups that used toilet facilities as meeting places for planning illegal activities. The privacy and regular traffic of these locations made them ideal for conducting business that required secrecy. The ultimate nightmare of medieval toilet use was the possibility of death by drowning in human waste. This fate befell countless individuals who fell through rotten floorboards, were pushed by attackers, or simply lost their balance while using facilities positioned over deep pits. The victims would plunge into accumulated sewage where the thick consistency of the waste made swimming impossible, and the toxic gases would quickly render them unconscious. Rescue attempts were rarely successful due to the dangerous conditions in waste pits. The toxic atmosphere would overcome rescuers within minutes, and the unstable nature of pit walls made ladder placement extremely difficult. Most rescue efforts resulted in additional casualties, as would-be saviors succumbed to the same conditions that had killed the original victims. The psychological trauma of witnessing such deaths affected entire communities. Families would be forced to watch their loved ones die slowly in waste pits, powerless to help due to the lethal conditions. The bodies of victims were often left to decompose in the pits, as retrieval was too dangerous and expensive for most communities to attempt. The documentation of these deaths in medieval records reveals a society that had normalized the most horrific outcomes of daily life. The casual tone used to describe deaths by waste drowning suggests that such incidents were so common that they no longer shocked contemporary observers. These deaths weren't merely accidents. They were the inevitable result of a civilization that had created a system of waste disposal that prioritized convenience over human life. Medieval toilet facilities functioned as massive incubation centers for deadly diseases that would periodically sweep through populations, killing millions. The concentration of human waste in these locations created perfect breeding conditions for cholera, dysentery, typhoid, and plague bacteria. The constant flow of human traffic through these facilities ensured that diseases could spread rapidly through entire communities. The Black Death, which killed 1/3 of Europe's population in the 14th century, was directly linked to the sanitation failures of medieval toilet systems. The disease spread through contaminated water supplies that had been polluted by toilet discharge, and the cramped, unsanitary conditions of public toilets accelerated transmission rates. Historical records show that communities with better toilet facilities had lower mortality rates, while areas with primitive waste disposal systems were completely devastated. The recurring cycles of epidemic disease that characterized medieval life were largely driven by the continuous contamination created by toilet systems. Populations would recover from one outbreak only to face another wave of disease as contaminated water supplies and waste facilities reintroduced deadly pathogens. This cycle of disease and recovery shaped medieval society's relationship with death, creating a fatalistic worldview that accepted mass mortality as an inevitable consequence of daily life. The medical understanding of the time attributed these diseases to supernatural causes, bad air, or divine punishment, completely missing the connection to waste contamination. This ignorance ensured that the same mistakes were repeated generation after generation, creating a perpetual cycle of death and disease. The legacy of these medieval toilet systems extended far beyond their immediate health impacts, shaping European civilization's approach to sanitation, privacy, and public health for centuries to come. The practices that began as practical solutions to waste disposal evolved into systematic generators of human suffering, creating a dark foundation upon which modern sanitation systems would eventually be built. The wooden planks have rotted away, the stone walls have crumbled, and the waste pits have been filled and forgotten. But the legacy of medieval toilets remains embedded in our collective consciousness, a reminder that the simple act of human waste disposal can reveal the darkest aspects of civilized society. In those communal spaces where privacy was surrendered and dignity was abandoned, medieval people confronted the brutal reality that survival often required sacrificing the most basic human needs for safety, health, and respect. The next time you close a bathroom door behind you, remember the countless generations who never knew such luxury and who paid for that absence with their lives.